All right, guys. This is our July's Lunch and Learn. I apologize, we're coming to you a day late, but I have Presley Lewandowski with us today, and I'm going to let her tell you about herself and kind of this unique mindset coaching thing that she has done, and we're going to dive into the mind today. And how it probably pertains to what a lot of you are dealing with. So I will give you the stage.
Thank you. My name's Presley. I work for Sport Mindset as a mental performance coach. So I work with athletes on, we call it the complete mental game. So mental skills everywhere from goal setting, motivation, confidence, and imagery. And we work with athletes who are experiencing mental blocks, injuries, just skill regression, performance anxiety, and any of the above. So a little about my background. I was a gymnast growing up. I myself experienced a lot of the things that the athletes I work with experience. And I worked with a mental performance coach when I was, sorry, that's my cat meowing, when I was in high school. And he kind of opened my world to the idea of how we can use our mind to help us not only in sports but outside of sports as well, and how we can use, sorry, this cat. And what I found was that it not only helped me in gymnastics, but as I transitioned out of my sport career, I used these skills so much in my everyday life as well. And that's what kind of inspired me to go into this field and help athletes like myself. So that's where I'm at right now. Oh, I think you're muted, Carla. There you
Thank you. There's music going on over here, so I was going to mute to give you the courtesy. So today we kind of wanted to dive in a little bit to more about imagery and how we can use that to start overcoming injuries. We're going to talk about injuries today. There are plenty of other topics of conversation I think we could cover with you, but let's talk about the imagery and mindset, and kind of first tell us how that's important, and then how do you start to work with somebody to overcome an injury?
Yeah. So imagery, it's a lot of athletes have honestly never even heard of it because it's a little bit different than just regular visualization. So it's incorporating all of our senses, not only the visual part, but sounds, smells, and physical feelings, which is why it's so beneficial to injury recovery. When you're using imagery, the same neurons in your brain that are firing when you're physically performing are the same ones that fire when you are using imagery. So it kind of tricks your brain into thinking that you're still practicing and performing even though you're not physically performing. So we call them our mental reps. And yeah, that's kind of why it can be so beneficial to that injury recovery, because athletes, when they're injured, they are often not practicing and not getting in those physical reps that they normally do.
Right. So maybe just so our viewers can kind of understand, bring us through a recent case that you've had of an athlete, kind of what their injury has been, and kind of how do you start phasing in imagery as they're physically trying to recover?
Yeah. So I worked with a baseball player recently. It was more of an aftermath of an injury, but he was a pitcher, got injured pitching, and had a lot of anxiety coming back into that role of pitching again. So we did a whole imagery script for him on just to prepare him to kind of get back into that physical role. So what we do is we kind of start with an outline of our script, and it's them giving me as much details as they can about the environment, what they want to think and feel, see everything throughout their script. And then I kind of write it all out and put together a script and record it for them. So it's something that they can then put their headphones in and listen to before a game or before practice to kind of just prepare themselves and give them more confidence transitioning into that. So a lot of athletes that are injured, we either use scripts like that for them or give them other ways that they can utilize it as well, whether they're still at practice and observing, and they can use imagery to visualize themselves practicing alongside their teammates, or even just like visualizing, looking at the equipment and visualizing themselves using the equipment as they would have before they were injured. Also using it during rehabilitation exercises too. So seeing, we call it like healing imagery, and it's pretty much a way for athletes to visualize their breaks mending, their tissues healing, bruising and swelling just going away, and or your blood flowing. And that's a kind of a different way that athletes can use imagery as well. So it kind of signals to the brain like what we want the body to do, and it pushes forward our healing that way.
Interesting. So, from a coach, like an athletic coach standpoint, we have like a warm-up routine, like physically things that we do pretty much the same for whatever we're going to perform at. And so when this person is able to come back, you're utilizing that script, and it's essentially like now an additional part of their warm-up routine.
Yeah.
So like you incorporate it into like now that they're going to go practice, or now that they're going to go into the game, you've now incorporated that script into their everyday.
Yeah. And that's a lot of times, so athletes that have never used imagery before and they start when they're injured, if they are able to really carry it into afterwards too, and when they're not injured anymore. So just utilizing it, because it's important for all athletes to use. So learning it when they're injured, but also learning how to still use it when they are able to physically perform again too, because it's going to kind of facilitate that comeback and help them be more confident in themselves and their abilities as they're coming back from an injury. Because that is often a big fear for athletes coming back, that they're going to get re-injured again or experience pain. And if they can utilize imagery in the correct way, then it can really help them in the long run.
Very cool. So from a previous conversation, I know that you work with a lot of teens, right? So you have a lot of like tweens, teens, kind of high school athletes, and I know you have above and below as well. When you are trying to get this script from them, do you find that there are challenges for them to dive into using all of their senses? Like, do you have to like help them understand like their senses in that aspect?
Yeah. So before we even write the script, we actually go through a whole imagery training. And so that's kind of me just walking them through different exercises for imagery. So we start with just visual. So having them close their eyes, visualizing different colors and shapes, and really trying to hold on to those images of those colors and shapes as long as they can. And then we'll move into smells. So having them try to visualize and come up with the smell of the locker room, or turf, or fresh cut grass. Like we go through all different smells. And then from there, we'll go into sounds like crowd noise, or sounds that they hear when they're in the gym to kind of remind them of those things that are familiar to them and show them that they can visualize sounds actually and hold on to them. And then we end with feelings, because that tends to be the hardest one. After you get through the visual part and then the sounds and the smells, actually using imagery to feel yourself doing things tends to be the hardest for that age group, but that's why we do the training. So actually feeling yourself running and like the foot strike on the ground, or feeling the wind moving past you as you're running. And we'll kind of go through different trainings like that so that they're familiar with all the senses that we want to bring into their own unique script.
Very cool. We at UP, we did a group training a couple years back, and we did a similar thing, not necessarily for injury, just to like notice our surroundings and putting ourselves in that environment. And then they had added in taste. Do you guys ever add in taste?
Sometimes. So I try to ask athletes, sometimes there's like certain drinks that they bring to a game or a practice that it's like really important for them to have this certain flavor of Gatorade when they're at their game. So like we'll incorporate that sometimes. Even I know like some athletes like will have like lick their fingers before like they throw a ball. So like noticing like those small things too. We do incorporate those at times.
Yeah, that was just super interesting, and a lot of people had a challenge figuring out like what are they tasting? Like, my saliva? Like, I have dry mouth? Like, it was an interesting question that kind of brought up. You mentioned something about like what do you hear from the crowd and what emotion do you get from the crowd? Now, given we've just come off like a year of quarantine, back to relative normal, did you notice anything different with your athletes during COVID when there weren't really crowds?
Not particularly. I feel like because sports, even though they were on TV with no crowds, there was still like crowd noise put in on the TV too. So even if they weren't performing and with a crowd, then they're still watching things on TV with crowd noise, and they're still able to like remember and pick up those sounds. But no, that's a good question. I hadn't really thought of that. I'm sure it probably depends on how much the crowd plays into that athlete's role in their sport, and if it's something that they really pay attention to begin with. But yeah, I think as far as crowd noise, it's pretty easy for athletes to remember what that was like at least, and incorporate that into their script.
It's interesting. I work with US beach volleyball athletes in a sports medicine realm, not in a mindset realm, but sometimes you just end up having to talk about mindset because you're the only provider there. And what's super interesting is I've worked with all 8 of them going to the Olympics, and there's one particular athlete who really doesn't like crowds. He doesn't like a lot of commotion. He doesn't love a lot of people there, not even necessarily like, doesn't even necessarily love like the added attention that his family is, even though he loves his family. But it'll be super interesting because nobody can go to Tokyo. Like
Right.
It's like literally like probably this athlete's dream. And then I have another athlete and they love the crowd. They love that energy. They love the drive, like having their family there. It just like fills them up. So it's going to be really interesting to see how athletes, like particularly on the world's biggest stage, how they do with a change in what the environment usually is to what it will be now. Whether you see it as a distraction or a motivator, either way, like their family can't come.
Right. That'll definitely be really interesting because all athletes, they kind of thrive off of the environment differently. I think for like the ones that don't really enjoy the crowd and would rather there be no crowd, just really tapping into like their self-talk too, and like noticing like the things that are going on in their own mind, instead of things that are going on around them, can be really helpful. But
I'm going to just circle back to the script. You kind of had mentioned like the pitcher that you were doing this with. So as that athlete progresses, does the script change? Like, do you work with them? Like, if they've now kind of overcome that injury, now it's not just imagery for injury, but it's like imagery for performance. Like, how does that dynamic change?
yeah, so we tend to revisit the skills throughout our time working together. And if their injury is no longer a thing for them, we find different ways to use it. So whether it's just to prepare them for a game mentally, or to improve on a skill, or start getting new skills that they've been working on. So we will create new scripts for different things like that, when they no longer really need the script for injuries. So yeah, there's so many different ways that they can use it, and we don't always necessarily do the script either. I often encourage, if it's just to improve a skill or start learning a new skill, there's just conversation that we can have to talk about, okay, when you are learning this new skill, like how do you want to feel? What do you want to think? Like what sounds and what visions do you want to bring into that for you? So yeah, there's so many different ways that they can do it once they are not injured anymore.
So from like because we work with athletes in fitness and in sports performance, we're not necessarily sports coaches, but we're like a strength and conditioning coach or CrossFit coach or that kind of thing. Is there anything that like a coach can be doing to like, maybe they work with a team or an individual athlete? Is there anything that coach can be doing to kind of set the stage? So let's talk maybe like mini imagery for your team. Like what kind of things could that coach be doing to help bridge that gap? Even if the athletes don't necessarily work with like a mindset coach.
Yeah, there's definitely things that coaches can do to encourage that imagery, because that's going to lead to like a quicker recovery and a stronger comeback for them. So something that we used to do as athletes was when we were like preparing for, I was a gymnast, so when we were like putting our grips on for bars, I would sit there with my eyes closed, and I would just visualize my routines while I was getting ready. So little things like that, where it doesn't necessarily have to be like a big script, but that they can just start bringing that image into what they're going to do, like right before they do it. As a former coach myself, I used it a lot with athletes that were nervous for trying new skills, or that had maybe gotten hurt on a skill before and they didn't want to do it again. I would have them just step away, take a break, and I would tell them, okay, I want you to imagine yourself doing this skill 10 times before you step back up to attempt to do it again. And that often helped my athletes a lot. I worked with a lot younger athletes, but I think if they can understand it, then even the older athletes can find a way to bring that into their practices as well.
Awesome. There's a lot of days with our high school or our adult athletes. Oftentimes we provide like the workout of the day, and then we provide the stimulus of like, hey, like this is what we want you guys feeling. So whether that be we talk about their heart rates, like where do we want your heart rates, where do we want your perceived level of exertion, how this should feel. Sometimes we say like, yep, by about minute 4, you're going to be like, because if we want you to push near the red, like your muscles are going to feel tense, they're going to feel swollen, you're going to feel the pump, like you're going to feel like you're moving through concrete. Sometimes we like to set the stage for them so that they can kind of be like, okay, I knew this was coming. I don't have to panic. I don't have to freak out. They said this would happen, and this is what we do to get through it. Do you think prefacing people for what they're going to feel, even before it happens, do you feel like that's an important step in like growth?
Yeah, absolutely. I like how you said like they're moving through concrete too, because that's even something like that they can bring into imagery, like that they're actually moving through that. But yeah, I think kind of preparing them like while in the beginning, that might be more intimidating for some, knowing what they're going to feel. Like I said, with those the mental reps, like the more that they are prepared like that, then in the long run, it's going to help them grow in that way. So yeah, I can definitely see how that would be beneficial to prepare them for the feelings, and like not only the feelings, but like the thoughts that they have around those feelings as well.
Cool. Just a couple more questions here. So, there's probably a vast number of athletes who have undergone injuries and mentally haven't undergone any type of counseling or mindset training or anything to help overcome them. And I mean, you've probably seen them. I know I have, and they just sort of dwindle down where they love sports, but they literally can't get through this thing. How do you think we could, bring to the forefront that like part of overcoming an injury is mental. It isn't just physical. And like, how do we approach that and make better referrals and recommendations?
Yeah, I would say like definitely focusing on like, that piece of like self-talk. That's something that we do a lot of, because the situations that you're put in, they influence what your thoughts are about things, which then influence how your thoughts influence how you feel, which is going to then influence how you act and what the results are. So the idea that we just have so much power in our thoughts, and that if we can change our thoughts to be more positive, then it can change the outcome for us. So that's something that we really push for with athletes, is like you can't control everything that happens to you, but you can control your thoughts, and then from there you can control the outcomes of what you do or do not do. So
Okay. Uh-huh. All right. Do you have any other like kind of things you want to send us off with to wrap up with today?
I guess I could talk about a couple different perspectives of imagery, because that's something that athletes have questions on a lot, because there is different ways that we can imagine ourselves doing things. So we have either internal or external, and for internal, I describe it as like you're wearing a GoPro. So some athletes, they best visualize themselves when they're looking at it through the perspective of like their own eyes. And then you have external on the other hand, which is like you are sitting in the stands or on the sidelines watching yourself, or like watching yourself on a TV screen. And there's no right or wrong way to do it, but I think it's important for athletes to know like what works best for them, whether it's that internal or external point of view, and where they can find that like most clear and positive image of themselves, so that they know like when they're going into using imagery, how they want to view themselves and what's going to work best for them.
Interesting. Yeah. What is your go-to imagery, internal or external?
I am internal. But as an athlete, I definitely would challenge myself to. Internal is like what I automatically go to, but I think the more you do imagery and the better you get at it, it's fun to kind of challenge yourself, and you try to use that other point of view to visualize the same thing too, so that it just creates more mental toughness and helps you create like a better perspective of yourself and what you're doing. And yeah, just a way for you to mentally challenge yourself. So
Yeah, definitely. Like, I mean, if you're like you're the internal, like wearing the GoPro, and if for some reason you have like a mental block with that one, just put yourself in the stand, right? Like, so you have different tools that you can use.
yeah, because it can be hard, especially in the beginning. A lot of times we'll see ourselves failing, and we don't want that in our imagery. We want it to only be positive. So there were times when I just couldn't mentally get through a routine without messing up, or if I had a if I was if I had a mental block on a skill and I couldn't even do it in my imagery, then I would try to switch perspectives, because sometimes we just need that little challenge to push ourselves and see like what's going to work best. So
Um, and I'm curious if athletes ever ask you this, because there are certain situations that come up in my office, but it's more about physical pain. But do some athletes ask you, like, why is this so hard for me and not hard for other people to like overcome injuries, or, you know, performance anxiety or whatever it is? Like, do you have a good answer for that?
I mean, I just remind my athletes that it's hard for everyone, and whether we see that people are experiencing the same things we are or not, just know that like even the top athletes in the world, they've gone through injuries, they've experienced blocks and skill regression, but they were able to push through and do the things that they had to do to continue to move forward and get to where they're at today. So just reminding athletes like they're not alone, and the things that they're experiencing physically and mentally are normal, but there's things that we can do to help ourselves progress.
Yeah, I think having not only athletes but parents know that, uh, you know, the mentality aspect of sports needs to also be trained along with the physical. And that's something I know we try and incorporate in the mentality aspect with some of our athletes here, even though we aren't mindset coaches. We do dive a little into that. But I think that's a good thing for parents to realize too, so that if your child is seemingly having these mental blocks, that like there are people that specialize in getting them to the place where they want to be, and they're professionals in that light. You know, if I had a pipe burst in my house, I would call a plumber. And I think we just need to bring awareness out that, like, hey, if I'm having this mental block, like I should seek counseling and guidance for that, because there are solutions and it can be worked on and you can come through it in a healthier light.
Yeah. And
so
athletes and parents too, like a lot of times it kind of gets pushed back because it is normal to go through things like that in sports mentally, having those blocks and struggling with performance anxiety. It's a part of sports, but a lot of people just don't know that there are ways that we can help overcome these things and contribute to not only our physical performance and progression, but our mental performance and progression too. And not only is it going to help you in sports, but also outside of sports and in all aspects of your life. So
definitely. And I mean, I think a big takeaway is here is like, you can work on it, right? Like, just because you have a mental block or performance anxiety doesn't mean you always have to have it to that degree. Just like if you're a basketball player and you are not very good at free throws, like you can practice, you can continue that. And so there are coaches, there are drills, there are things that you can do, get more repetitions in, and things get better. And so I think that's just a great thing for our viewers to know, that like you can actually work on this stuff and should probably work on this stuff in the world of athletics.
absolutely. Yeah. There's we talk a lot about like just focusing on the things that we can control versus the things we can't, because in sports there's a lot of things you can't control that happen to you, or especially if you're on a team and playing team sports and you have multiple coaches, there's so many things that you don't have control over, but there are also so many things that you do have control over. So just making sure like that's where your focus is at is really important.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us and letting our audience know that some great insight for what you do. And until next time, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.